Our next speaker is Susila Gurusami from the Department of Sociology. Her talk is entitled, I Came Back to Life, Women in Los Angeles After Incarceration.
In the last 35 years, the number of women behind bars in the US has skyrocketed. So much so that today, 1 out of every 56 women will be incarcerated. Beyond that, more than 1 million women are on probation or parole. One reason for this is that women have been swept up by tough on crime legislation and increasingly imprisoned for nonviolent crimes. But the reality is, many of these women struggle with drug addiction, mental illness, and have histories of sexual and physical abuse. But few get the services that they really need. Is this a sign that our system needs to change? That maybe the way we've been approaching and labeling crime doesn't really help the public or the people behind bars? As a sociologist, I study the relationship between structure and agency, which means I look for patterns in how things like the law, the organization of public transit routes, and policing impact the types of choices that, in particular, formerly incarcerated women are able to make. My research focuses on incarcerated Black women just as they're released from prison or jail. And once they're out, I document what happens as they attempt to find their way back into society. Through my fieldwork, I got to know formerly incarcerated women, and they shared stories that illuminated their paths to prison. Many endured extensive sexual abuse before they were teenagers, and over half were diagnosed with mental illnesses. The correctional system does have mandatory programs that attempt to deal with these past sources of trauma, but these programs are often ineffective because they focus on personal responsibility, and they ignore that the moment a woman leaves the program, she steps back into the harsh daily realities of prison life, enduring the most degrading abuse by prison guards and staff. And it's not just what happens behind bars that sets many women up for failure. Once they're released, they have to contend with the fact that they've been discarded by the system and forgotten. Like 40-year-old Patricia, who said, "In there, we have this hope that our families are going to be loving and welcoming. But when you get out, everything has changed. We die to them. And when you get out, you come back alive, and they have to find a way to fit you back into their lives, and my family has no place to fit me." So it made me wonder, how do formerly incarcerated Black women resurrect their lives after years of being seen to those on the outside as socially dead? To find out, I spent 18 months in South LA with formerly incarcerated women and their children. Participants from my study came from 2 channels. The first were women who were living in or had lived in transitional homes. And the second were women that I met at anti-prison and felony activism events. I got to know them by helping with resumes, driving with them to pick up their children, and helping them to look for apartments. And what I found is that for formerly incarcerated women, life is a never-ending series of roadblocks. Imagine trying to find work with a felony label and struggling against homelessness. And if all those issues aren't enough, many women are still haunted by the emotional and physical traumas that linger from both childhood and incarceration. I struggled with how to best capture the adversity these women faced in their everyday lives and how hard they worked to overcome those obstacles. Reintegration problems are serious. 75% of the formerly incarcerated population end up rearrested, reconvicted, or reincarcerated within 3 years of release. And that's because incarceration and the public shaming that comes afterwards severs necessary life connections from family to finding work, to letting people feel like they have a place in the world around them. For instance, common policing tactics don't actually reduce rates of reincarceration. Instead, they isolate people from their local communities. Many women reported being frequently harassed by police on the street and being humiliated in front of their children and neighbors when officers would preemptively handcuff them outside of their homes during unannounced checks for drugs. But these women weren't passive victims to their experiences. Many of the women who I got to know through my research recently participated in an event in front of Linwood Jail for Women called Women Rising for Justice to protest a $2 billion initiative to build a new women's jail in LA. They demanded that LA reform its criminal justice system, which incarcerates more people than any city in the world. And they exposed how inequalities like racism, policing in poor LA communities, and criminalizing domestic violence act as feeders of mass incarceration for poor Black women. And what I discovered is that women who became involved in anti-prison work became passionately connected to the people around them, and it gave them purpose. And as a result, they were far less likely to return to prison or jail. These women worked so hard to convince the people around them that they deserved second chances. And the investment required for comprehensive reentry services averages around $15,000 a year. And this covers transitional housing, family reunification services, and employment search assistance. In comparison, it costs about $70,000 a year to incarcerate a woman for a year. And I witnessed firsthand that these women are earnestly seeking second chances to prove their trustworthiness to the world around them. So I investigated, how do you create trust and intimacy between formerly incarcerated women of color who are isolated by where they live, poverty, and their criminal histories, and those of us who don't witness their everyday lives? One way is through legislation like Proposition 47, which de-escalated minor theft crimes and drug possession from felonies to misdemeanors. Prop 47 allowed many of the formerly incarcerated to clear their felonies, and as a result, get better jobs in about a third of the time and make about $6,000 more annually. And women like Patricia were key advocates in getting Prop 47 passed last November. They campaigned door to door to convince the voters that they deserved a fighting second chance. And there are so many more women out there hungry to help create a better world for all of us. And it's my hope that Prop 47 is just the beginning. But in order to commit to progress, we need to get a clearer picture of where the money goes. And is building a jail to house women in need of community services and education really the most effective and humane way to spend $2 billion? And imagine the possibilities of what that money could do. It could give more than 30,000 Angelino women a life behind bars for a year. Or it could give more than 100,000 women a life beyond bars. So what will you choose?